Welcome, and thank you for joining us as we launch JWI's National Center on Domestic and Sexual Violence in the Jewish Community. My name is Meredith Jacobs, and I am honored to serve as CEO of JWI. In 2020, as the horrifying consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic caused an uptick of domestic and sexual violence, the world seemed to wake up to the prevalence of violence in their communities. JWI, with the help of a grant from the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Philanthropies, embarked on a groundbreaking needs assessment of the Jewish domestic violence survivors and programs. Led by JWI's Chief Program Officer, Deborah Rosenblum, along with Roberta Valente, who is co-founder of the ABA's Commission on Domestic Violence, and JWI's Dorian Karp and Ariella Nekritz, the assessment uncovered real needs for support for domestic violence program staff and advocates, and gaps in survivors' access to economic security, legal support, safe and affordable housing, and perhaps most shocking, a lack of support from the Jewish community. Again and again, survivors shared feelings of being shunned by their Jewish friends and neighbors. The community, we pride ourselves in being there to help those in need. Instead, too often sided with the abusers when they were machers in the community. But just like we did in 2005, when JWI followed our first needs assessment by establishing the Clergy Task Force to End Domestic Abuse in the Jewish Community, and JWI's Interfaith Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, our 2020 needs assessment is our call to action, and we are responding with the National Center. It is under this umbrella that we will continue our longtime programs, such as our prevention work on college campuses, as well as new initiatives, including the Coalition of Jewish Domestic Violence Programs, convening all 40 of our nation's local Jewish TV programs, providing training, support, and a place to share best practices and innovations. And here for you, where through our partnership with the JCC Association of North America, we will offer trauma-informed training for JCC preschool and camp staff, administration, and security teams so that they can better support survivors and their children. And JWI will be forming Jewish coordinated communal response teams throughout the country, gathering leaders of local Jewish agencies, clergy, and staff of the local domestic violence programs to ensure ongoing training, awareness programs, and support for survivors. In the upcoming months, you will learn about additional initiatives JWI will launch, addressing economic security and legal resources. And I have to thank Naomi and Jerry Sensor of the Sensor Foundation and the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Philanthropies, who responded to our needs assessment with Hineni, here I am, and generously supported the work of the center. But now let's begin our panel. I'm joined today by Susie Feldman, an endowment specialist at the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit. Susie spent 20 years practicing tax law. She also spent 9 years in an abusive relationship, married to the Jewish doctor who was every Jewish mother's dream. She now speaks to groups about surviving domestic violence and was a speaker at JWI's second International Conference on Domestic Abuse in the Jewish Community. She's happily remarried, and all of her children are domestic violence advocates. She serves on JWI's Board of Trustees and the board of the Jewish Coalition Against Domestic Abuse in Detroit, Michigan. Mark Horowitz, who is Vice President for Program and Talent at the JCC Association of North America. Mark supports the working groups for the Sheva Center, Inclusion, Engaging Families, Mandel Center for Jewish Engagement, and Discover Catch Plus. He was the founding executive director of the Jewish Early Childhood Education Initiative. He holds a master's degree in education from SUNY Buffalo and received ordination and an honorary doctorate from Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music. And Sarah, an advocate from Florida, who is a licensed mental health counselor specializing in providing counseling and support to individuals experiencing crisis. She has extensive knowledge of community resources and provides direct service and trauma and crisis intervention to both individuals and organizations. Her outreach in the community spans such groups as Jewish day schools, public schools, colleges, Gay Student Alliance, Synagogue Sisterhoods, and the Israeli American Council. Through these trainings, Sarah provides education to prevent and empower individuals throughout the country. For Sarah's safety and protection, we are not using her real name, and she will not be appearing on camera. And our special guest, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, will be joining us later. Unfortunately, her flight back to DC last night was canceled. You know what's going on between the weather and air travel, but she is on her way, and we do expect her to join us soon. So let's begin our conversation. And by the way, for those of you listening, we will have time for Q&A, but please don't wait until then. If you have a question, type it into the chat and we will get to it. So Susie, I'm going to start with you. You were a critical part of our needs assessment, not only as a member of our advisory committee, but as a survivor. And while, as I mentioned earlier, we heard so many survivors share stories of what it was like to have felt shunned, your story demonstrated what it can mean when the community truly supports the survivor. And I'm wondering if you would share your story now.
Thanks, Meredith. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. So I am a survivor. And I'm the child of Holocaust survivors. So I think that gave me the strength to go forward and to tell my story and to realize that I had 3 little kids. When I was married, I was practicing law, and I married the good Jewish doctor. And I thought my life was going to be absolutely unbelievable. It was like being married to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And unfortunately, it was probably about 6 or 7 months into the marriage when I had experienced my first actual physical assault from my ex-husband. It was a very quick Sunday morning. I had gone to get bagels. I had a flat tire on my way back. I stopped off. When I got home, I rang the doorbell, and he was angry that the bagels were late and that they were cold at that point, and he punched me in the nose. The first time is a surprise. Every other time, a victim is aware that something's going to come along. And shame on us. I grew up in a community where I never saw this, because it doesn't happen in the Jewish community. It doesn't happen among educated people. So how could I, someone who had graduated from the University of Michigan, had gone to law school, had their LLM in tax law, could all of a sudden have fallen prey to this? And it was very characteristic. I received, in return for my pain, I received a Steinway piano, because I play piano, and I received a Steinway piano as a gift, as his way of expressing his sorrow. This continued on with the name calling, with the financial abuse, where I had a limited amount access of money to pay household bills, to pay any expenses, to cover anything going on with my children. People ask why I had 3 kids when this was going on behind closed doors. My kids were the only thing that I had unconditional love from, that I knew at some point in my life that they would grow and see and have that relationship with me that would protect me or heal me from all the pain I was going on internally. But it was always hidden, and it was always behind closed doors, and I was a shadow of myself. At the point in time when we were up north, and I had a 7-week-old, I had my 4-year-old, my 5-year-old, and my mother in the room, my husband lost it, and he beat me in front of my kids and my mother. At that point, I knew that I couldn't stay there, because I could not raise children who would look for a partner in life like that, or a son who felt that he could do that to someone, or that they could look at me with such demeaning looks, thinking, how could you take this? And so I was barefoot. I grabbed the keys to the car. I went to the hospital. I left the kids with my mom, and the police came in. And at that point, it was out of my hands. It was a police matter. He was arrested. My kids remember vividly seeing their father handcuffed and taken away. At that night, when I returned home from the hospital, I received phone calls every 2 minutes, every 10 minutes, collect calls from him saying, you did this to me, but I won't divorce you. That is the mindset of somebody who is so controlling that they think that they could do it, that they're doing me a favor to stay with me. It took me the course of a summer to figure out that I knew I had to leave because it was dangerous for me. But when making the decision to leave as a victim, it is also the scariest time to walk out the door. And I didn't want to look back. I wanted to leave and not look back. So when I left with clothes and garbage bags. I had no plan other than to get papers from our judge to say that I could take my kids, leave the community without fear of having kidnapped them. And I took off. I ended up in a community in Tucson. I did not know anyone there. I walked into the day school. I said to the Jewish day school, my daughter was at Hillel Day School in Detroit. I need a school for my child. This is my story. I'm hiding. They opened their doors and they let me in. I needed to take my son to a preschool. He had been at a Solomon Schechter preschool. I went into the rabbi. The rabbi said to me, you must be the new person in town. I said, that's me. I said, how can you tell? He said, you have 3 little kids. He said, and what's your story? It turned out that his roommate at the seminary was my rabbi here. And he said, what do you need? I said, I need a preschool for my son. I don't have any money. He said, you don't only need a preschool for your son. He said, you need support, mental health support for you and your kids. I'll take you to Jewish Family Service. They have a sliding scale. We'll be happy to help you and get you on the road again. So with that, I had my daughter in one school. I had my son in another school. And I had the Jewish Community Center open their doors so I could bring my 7-week-old during the course of the entire year and bring her there to go to the daycare while I was getting some much needed respite and time away just to walk around and clear my mind. With that being said, I then had to come back to this community and I had a restraining order. I had to bring the kids back every 6 weeks, fly them back for supervised visits. And I brought them back finally at the end of the summer because I was told at some point I would have to share my vacations and share holidays with my ex-husband, and I wasn't going to do that to them. But I once again needed a community to support me. I needed to return my son to his preschool. I needed to return my daughter to Hillel Day School. I needed to find a place where my kids could participate in athletic activities. And it was the Jewish community that opened their doors and said, we're here for you. Hineni, we're here for you. They are here for us. And I was so thrilled to be able to have that participation. And it changed my life and it changed my kids' life, because all too often, these kids who are growing up in these households where they see it, where parents think that a mother may think that it's better for her to stay in this environment, they tend to perpetuate the same behavior they saw at home. And I know now, and I knew at that point, when my ex-mother-in-law asked me if he hit me with a closed fist or an open hand, that was a woman who had experienced this from her husband her entire life. And I was not going to bring up daughters looking for that or his son thinking he could do that. And so it became my mission, as my mother had survived the Holocaust, to tell her story and educate, to share my story, which in detail is painful and dark. But when I look at the end, and I know that on Monday, I'll be celebrating my 20th wedding anniversary with my husband, and that on October 5th, when I left this community to go live in hiding, there was no such thing as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And every year I get a text from my kids that morning saying, thank you for bringing us and celebrating our life. So to me, there's nothing more that I'm more passionate about than to making the world aware that domestic violence is here. It's in the Jewish community, and we need to help eradicate it and empower women so that they don't go through what I went through so many years ago.
Susie, thank you. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for sharing with the world, for everything you've done. You're a powerful advocate and champion, and your words create change for so many countless survivors and children. And I thank you. With that, I just want to turn to another champion of the Jewish community and of women, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is Florida's first Jewish Congresswoman and has dedicated her public life serving South Floridians for nearly 3 decades. And her years in Congress are marked by such meaningful legislation as the passage of the Jewish American Heritage Month, the EARLY Act, the Rape Survivor Child Custody Act, and currently the Fair Housing for Domestic Survivors Act that she has reintroduced with Senator Jeanne Shaheen and that she will speak about today. Personally, I first met the Congresswoman when we came to her office to meet. She was going to speak with our Young Women's Impact Network. And I can't remember why, but for some reason, the conference room we had arranged was not available. And Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz said, you know what, pick up your muffins and your coffee and come into my office. And she spends this inspiring time. I left the office wanting to run for something, but talking about what inspired her to step up to serve. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm honored to turn the microphone over to you now.
Thank you so much, Meredith. And I remember that. And, you just have to make do. That's what Jewish women do. And especially Jewish mothers, when it comes to making sure that people are well fed and well cared for, that's always the top of my list, and certainly the values in which I was raised. And certainly those values include being aligned with Jewish Women International and the incredible work that you do. And I'm just so honored to be here with you to launch the National Center for Domestic and Sexual Violence in the Jewish community. And and I forgive me for my background, for the way in which I'm coming to you. The travel gods were not smiling on me since last night, so I just landed at home in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm headed to my home, and probably will complete the event from there. But one of the things that I'm always struck by when we talk about domestic violence in the Jewish community is, and Susie, thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience, because I think so many Jews across the world, but certainly in the United States, don't think that domestic violence touches our community. And really, there's an arrogance to that perception. For similar reasons that we also sort of hope and perceive that Jews don't commit crimes, and that Jews don't do any of the other heinous things that exist throughout our society. I mean, hopefully it happens less often, but it doesn't matter how much it happens. We have to combat its scourge anywhere and everywhere that it happens. So acknowledging the true leadership and vision of you, Meredith, really for spearheading this effort, for your dedication to Jewish women and survivors everywhere is just so important. And I'm really I'm honored to be here alongside the advocates and survivors, Susie and Sarah and Mark, and look forward to continuing to hear from them throughout this hour. This October, we know we join with so many others across the Jewish community and beyond to shine a spotlight on Domestic Violence Awareness Month. That's why it's timely that we're here to discuss the National Center, a hub for initiatives that will drive concrete, long-term solutions to address domestic violence in the Jewish community. As Meredith mentioned, the National Center will work to meet the systemic needs of survivors and support the local Jewish programs and advocates that serve them. This new initiative is poised to change the way the entire community, from clergy and neighbors to educators and service providers, are able to respond to abuse. And I'm proud to be your partner in Congress as you work towards realizing these life-saving goals. We know COVID-19 has helped us realize that there is a need for the center now more than ever. It illuminated what we've already known for far too long. Domestic violence is a public health crisis, and the Jewish community, as I said, is far from immune. For many who have been trapped at home with an abuser, these last 19 months have been more than just an inconvenience, they've been dangerous. Social distancing, a compassionate measure designed to protect everyone's health, proved to be a life-threatening directive for others. Growing evidence shows that the pandemic made intimate partner violence and domestic abuse more common and often more severe. Since January of 2020, police departments reported increases of incidents of domestic violence in cities across the country. It went up by 18% in San Antonio, 22% in Portland, Oregon, and 10% in New York City, according to the American Journal of Emergency Medicine. At Boston's Brigham and Women's Hospital, one study found that radiology scans and superficial wounds consistent with domestic abuse in one 3-month stretch of this year had exceeded the totals of the previous 2 years combined. That is staggering. And as the pandemic drags on, so has the abuse. Just as the disease continues to claim more lives, isolation-linked domestic violence is claiming more victims each day. With safe harbors cut off, more people are left to suffer with what the United Nations calls a shadow pandemic of domestic abuse within the larger viral pandemic. Only when the second airborne pandemic lifts will the full scope of that shadow pandemic truly be known. What we do know is that domestic violence touches people in every community, from every walk of life, regardless of race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic and political status. It truly does affect everyone. And as the ACLU has said, domestic violence is a human rights violation and a threat to the safety of women and children across the country and world. Even without a pandemic, the statistics are sobering. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Wrap your mind around that statistic. A quarter of women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. In the US, more than 10 million women and men are victims of physical violence by an intimate partner. And 1 in 15 children are exposed to intimate partner violence each year, 90% of whom witness the violence directly. According to the JWI Needs Assessment, Jewish survivors of domestic violence also face many barriers as a result of their abuse. 98% of survivors lack the financial resources, and Susie touched on this, to escape a dangerous situation. 93% have fears of leaving the relationship, and 77% experience feelings of guilt or shame. I'm a mom raising 2 daughters. Actually, I guess they've been raised. They're 22 and 18 now, and I have a 22-year-old son. But while raising them, and as they now walk off into their life, beginning their independence, these are staggering and frightening statistics. And I hope that we've given them the strength they need to be able to address the challenges that they might face, because we know that no one's immune. As a legislator, these are harrowing statistics that drive me to redouble my commitment to combating domestic violence. Jewish survivors' needs don't differ from mainstream survivors, but there are additional layers of communal, cultural, and faith-focused issues that are critical to their well-being. And like many other issues, survivors' healing and independence depend on the Jewish community and our capacity and willingness to meet both their short and long-term needs through new collaborations, partnerships, and policy changes. With this center, we have a real opportunity for the Jewish community to step up and take a lead in supporting survivors by creating a community where survivors feel a sense of belonging. From my time in the Florida legislature to my role as a senior appropriator in Congress to introducing legislation on fair housing for victims of survivors of domestic violence, I will always lend my voice and my vote to help Jewish women, families, and survivors. And I look forward to discussing my legislative work further with you during the Q&A. And once again, I want to applaud JWI's amazing work, pledge my continued partnership to uncovering the impact of domestic violence in the Jewish community, because through your work, and we know that we can continue to raise awareness, support victims, and bring an end to domestic violence and abuse. Thank you to JWI for hosting this powerful event and for all that you do in our community. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz, thank you so much for your championship and for your words and for being here today. You know, Mark, both the Congresswoman and Susie talked about the effects of violence on the child witnesses. Heartbreaking when Susie was talking about her fear of how her children would grow up, made me think of a story that Deborah Rosenblum often shares when speaking with, she had talked to a preschool teacher who shared that a little boy in the classroom had been kicking a little girl in the stomach. And when the teacher said, what are you doing? He said, but that's what my daddy does to my mommy. So Mark, I want to turn to you. Here for You is part of the National Center's work as both an educator and senior staff of the JCC Association. Can you share why the JCC Association felt it important to partner with us on this initiative?
Thank you, Meredith. It's an honor to be here, and Congresswoman and Sarah and Susie. Our CEO, Doron Krakow, was invited to a think tank that the National Center convened. And when he was presented with the research you provided on how clearly our Jewish community has been in denial about domestic violence, as we have on other public justice issues, he knew we needed to act. We are a community organization that prides itself on engaging families with our understanding of Jewish values. And to me, we cannot claim that if we are not taking care of basic needs and keeping our families and their children safe. Our shared vision of the concept of brit, the Hebrew word for covenant, implies that we are in pursuit of a shared vision, and in our building relationships with our families that are enacted through a mutual understanding of specific rights and responsibilities. The dignity and safety of our families needs to be seen as a given right. In our early childhood centers, we have 30,000 children across the continent and their families, and 6,000 classroom educators. We are all mandated reporters when we see any kind of abuse. We certainly have training yearly about recognizing the warning signs of child abuse and neglect. We teach our educators how to identify the signs and behavioral indicators of child abuse and neglect for preschool children. We identify examples of behaviors that might indicate familial and institutional abuse, and we observe children for signs of abuse and neglect. We deal with them as best we can, but really don't have the strategies to understand how to support these children and their families, even in these most obvious ways, let alone in the complex and often hidden horrors that families and young children might be enduring. What is involved legally in these issues? How do we confront these issues safely without making them worse? How can we be respectful of the victims and provide the greatest support possible? We believe that humankind was created in the image of God, in Hebrew, B'Tselem Elohim. We are reminded that each of us is equal in our divine nature, and that our treatment of others is a reflection of our faith and our respect for our role in our society and the universe. And so when the invitation to join you came, we knew we were obligated to play any role we could to ensure our adherence to these values. We needed an intentional and proven course of action, and it was natural for us to say yes, and to join hands with you and say out loud, as your name so beautifully signifies, we at the Jewish community centers across North America are truly here for you. We have all kinds of toolboxes at our disposal right now that measure the quality of our programs, our buildings, our aquatics. We cannot turn our eyes from a toolbox that can literally save lives. Our JCCs of North America Early Learning Framework says, at our JCC Early Childhood Centers, we recognize each child's unique and special abilities and encourage appreciation and acceptance of all. We develop a warm, nurturing relationship with children and their families, which is how we show them that we care deeply about them. We express joy in who they are, helping them to feel safe and secure. Margaret Wheatley is a contemporary American writer, teacher, and speaker, and she wrote, "There is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about." Thank you for bringing this important work to our attention and for helping us to further define what we care about, what we need to be caring about, and to be able to step up to the plate and partner with you. And in closing, some wisdom and some inspiration from a favorite teacher of mine, the British American author Simon Sinek, who says, "Leadership is not about being in charge. It's about caring for those you are in charge of." Thank you for this critical opportunity. We are so grateful.
Mark, thank you so much. And what a beautiful quote from Wheatley. And to reference another Simon Sinek, I feel like today is about the why behind our how. And we are excited. For those of you listening, we welcomed the pilot cohort of JCCs representing the Bender JCC from Greater Washington, the JCC of Staten Island, of Miami, of Tucson, Arizona, and of San Diego, California. We've already begun our meetings with them, and the trainings will launch this January. And I thank you and Sue Gelsey, and of course, Jerome Krakow, for your partnership and leadership.
It's a gift to us. Thank you very much.
Sarah, I want to turn to you next. It doesn't go unnoticed that we can't use your name and that you have to be off camera today. I cannot begin to imagine the emotional toll you experience as an advocate working on the ground with survivors. Can you share what JWI's new collaborative could mean, what it could be like to have peer support forums, to have convenings where you can share with your colleagues from across the country? What are your hopes for what this new initiative could bring?
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be here today with everyone and to hear everyone's stories. I'm very excited about this collaborative and what it could mean. And I feel like this collaborative will give advocates and therapists working with DV clients the opportunity to connect, to get support, and also to get resources. This collaborative creates a support system while also being able to provide our clients with the best possible care. When JWI began the needs assessment, they also started to provide peer-to-peer support groups. When I participated in these forums, I found that it was a safe space to be able to talk about the work that we're doing in the communities. We also talk a lot about self-care at each forum. We do a short meditation or a grounding technique to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves while also doing this work. I think that being able to connect with colleagues that are doing amazing work in their communities is truly essential. We're able to process, learn, and share and support each other. And the more people that join, the more support and connections that we can create. So my hopes for this collaborative are that more advocates join and find the support and resources that I have already found to be helpful in the work I do in my community. The work that advocates do within domestic abuse is very important. And to have a collaborative where we create a space to connect with Jewish communities across the country gives us the opportunity to reduce stigma and take steps towards making a change. So I'm very hopeful for this collaborative, and I think that it's going to bring many opportunities for us to continue to have conversations about domestic abuse in the Jewish community and what it actually looks like. And that, again, I always like to share with when I do my outreach, that domestic abuse does not discriminate against anyone, no matter who you are. And exactly like Susie shared with her story, you know, she was a successful lawyer married to a successful doctor. And so a lot of times people think that domestic abuse couldn't happen to her. So to be able to have this collaborative and to share resources, to connect with other individuals that are doing amazing work in their communities, I think is really essential to continue to make change and reduce stigma in our communities.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I believe we have our first convening of the collaborative scheduled coming up. And I want to thank JWI's Ariella Nekritz for leading that important initiative. I also want to invite those of you listening, if you have a question, please enter them into the chat. But I want to turn back to Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz. Part of the work of the National Center is in advocacy. Advocacy is for decades a part of JWI's work. The Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, FIPSA, which actually passed the House this past Tuesday. Any place where we can discuss economic security or the intersection of gun violence and domestic violence. And we've just launched efforts in Maryland to create state legislation that will help survivors who have experienced financial abuse to access loans. So with that, Congresswoman, could you please talk more about the Fair Housing for Domestic Violence Survivors Act, and also how those of us on the call can help your efforts and drive systemic change to support survivors?
Absolutely. And Sarah, thank you so much for being an advocate, all while making every effort to deservedly keep yourself safe. I want to just first stress, especially given that I represent the state of Florida, that Florida does have resources available to support domestic violence survivors. And I just want to make sure that anyone listening in Florida, if they have a friend, if they themselves or a loved one are experiencing intimate partner violence, please call the Florida Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-500-1119. And you can also visit the Florida Department of Children and Families website. Of course, abusers may monitor computer activity, and it sometimes might be better to visit a library or use the computer of a friend to access those resources. And we did pass the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act this week. We've also passed VAWA out of the House, and I'm hopeful that and expectant that the United States Senate will take up both of those bills. Very critical. President Biden, when he was a senator, obviously championed VAWA and really was one of the driving forces behind it. But we do have gaps when it comes to protections, and I have introduced legislation with Senator Shaheen to make sure that we can protect women in particular from housing discrimination, because so often you have landlords who, rather than wanting to help and protect their tenants, they would rather just get rid of the problem, which is how they view it too often. And so there are evictions that take place as a result of repeated instances of the police coming to the home. And, obviously a woman who is a victim is wanting to protect herself. So making sure that we pass a law that prohibits discrimination in housing based on your status as a domestic violence victim is absolutely critical. While we are trying to make sure we can pass that bill, Senator Shaheen and I were joined by dozens of fellow legislators in leading a letter to our congressional leadership asking for additional funding for support services for survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and child abuse in a future government funding supplemental. We haven't seen a supplemental yet, but what we pushed for was at least $375 million for the Office on Violence Against Women and $50 million for the Victims of Child Abuse Act. So hopefully we do have a lot of resources in the Appropriations Act for domestic violence, and we just have to make sure that we continue to, the expression, throw enough stuff up on the wall, because we really can probably never fill in all those gaps, but making sure that we have centers like this one, that are really going to be able to be convening institutions and a quarterback so that we can help make sure those gaps are identified is critical. That's the work that I'm going to continue to do, and you can count on me to really use my vote and my voice to make sure that we can stand up for women in particular. We know that men are also victims of domestic violence, but obviously less often. But we have to make sure that we speak up and we speak out. And you have a team of advocates in the United States Congress that I'm proud to be a part of.
Thank you so much. And you can count on JWI to support your efforts.
Oh, I know that.
You have our number.
Absolutely. I know where to find you, and the same goes for you. So I apologize. I have to jump off, but thank you so much for including me and for pulling this together, and look forward to continuing to work with all of you.
Thank you so much. I want to keep an eye on the time. We have 5 minutes left. We have had 2 questions. One asking about how a local GV provider can become part of the Jewish coordinated communal response teams. I would say we'll send out links if you are staff of a Jewish domestic violence program and of course those programs serve all people, not just Jewish survivors, but they were established by the Jewish communities. I would encourage you to join the collaborative. If you are a member of the community looking to get more information, please reach out to us and we will connect you, and we will let you know when a JCCRT is coming to your community. Sarah, I wonder if you would want to address this. Someone posed the question asking us to discuss, and Susie, you might also want to chime in, invisible bruises. How so much of abuse is not discussed. And the questioner says, particularly in the modern Orthodox community, we know it's throughout the Jewish community. It's not just in any one denomination, but for me, the efforts we're undertaking right now are to raise awareness so that those survivors are seen and helped. But Sarah, I wonder if you'd want to chime in about invisible bruises.
Yes, thank you so much. That's a really, really great question. And part of my outreach and my dating abuse workshop really talks about what domestic abuse and dating abuse looks like. In that a lot of times there's not physical abuse, in that it's about power and control. So we talk about and educate our community about the different red flags and warning signs, but I also really like to provide examples of what that looks like, about isolation and power and control, and that it's not really overt a lot of times. I explain to my clients that, somebody doesn't show up on a first date with a bouquet of red flags. They are coming to themselves with their best self forward. And so to really being able to pay attention to the red flags and warning signs, I think is really important. And to touch on the invisible bruises in the modern Orthodox community, we actually see this across all communities within the Jewish community. I work with, Reform individuals, also the very ultra Orthodox, and domestic abuse looks the same in all of the communities.
I guess I'll chime in, having been a victim myself and now a survivor. Physical abuse is the last, as far as I'm concerned, is the last step. It was the emotional abuse. It was the name calling. It was the financial abuse. It was the way I was made to feel. He made sure to alienate everybody that I was in contact with, my family, my friends, so that I was very isolated. It is very, it's very demeaning. I still have, I know 20, 26, 27 years later, 30 years later, I still have some major issues for things that are really silly, but mentally, he just was able to destroy so much of my self-confidence and self-worth that it's taken a long time to get past those. Physical bruises go away. Ironically, I was in a play group with my daughter, and I was down in Florida, and we were at Disney World with my husband and my daughter, and I got a phone call from one of the people in my play group that another woman in my play group, she was also the child of survivors. She wanted to get divorced from her husband because he was very abusive. Instead, he took a gun, shot her in front of her mother, and then went to the cemetery and shot himself. And the story is that here we are, two educated women in a playgroup of 6 people, and 2 of us are abused, not able to share our story. One ends up 6 feet under, and the other one leaves, and doesn't feel that they could share their story because I was protecting him, saying, well, if he changes, then I don't want you, Meredith, or you, Sarah, to look at him differently. So I can't share that part of me. So I become very quiet and internalize everything and struggle until the physical abuse becomes so severe that the scenario has to come about that you have to leave. But the emotional ties and the emotional and the financial and everything that goes along with it is so difficult to accept, and it's more painful than the initial shock of being hit. The only thing that's different is that when you're hit, and if it happens in front of your children, then they see that. They don't understand that the quiet nods, the quiet looks, or the pushes or the shoves, or the name calling is anything that they should be that concerned about, because they don't see what goes on around a dinner table in another home. And it's the victim or the survivor that walks around with that pain and carries that baggage with them throughout their lives until they're able to shed everything.
Thank you so much to both of you for sharing. It's something that we continue to try and message, that abuse is more than physical. I think everyone on JWI staff has a story to tell when we've worked with women who you would never suspect, women who are leading philanthropic initiatives, who represent the wealthiest families in the communities, who will disclose that they don't have access to their family's finances, where they are surviving abuse. And it is all of our hopes that the initiatives that we're all engaging on will make a difference and will cause a shift and will move the needle and provide a safer community for all of us. I want to thank all of you who spent your morning listening and learning, to our panelists, to Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz. I hope you all were inspired by what you heard today. Our work at JWI is ambitious and critically important, and we need your help to make it all possible. If you're interested in learning more and supporting JWI, I do hope you will reach out to me. Thank you all. Be safe, and Shabbat Shalom.